Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and Churches of Kerala. Is there any connecting link between these three otherwise obviously disconnected entities? This thought really got me interested, rather intrigued this morning, and I thought I'll share with you some basic thoughts, some basic concerns, insights, if you like, pertaining to this. Now, the focal point is this. It amazes me, I'm sure it amazes you, it amazes the whole world, how overnight Donald Trump turned the inveterate hatred of America towards Putin, and therefore Putin's Russia, into something of admiration, positivity, warm emotional hospitality, to the extent that if Putin were to suddenly turn up in the United States, a vast majority of Republicans would queue up just to embrace him, which was unthinkable almost a month ago. Well, it didn't take Donald Trump a month to accomplish this miracle. He's a magician of emotions. He's a magician of attitudes. He has a magic wand. He just weaves it and everything changes. I don't think anyone in contemporary history has managed to change global attitudes, global stereotypes, global assumptions and presuppositions to such an extent in such a short span of time. I don't think any religious leader has done it in the past. They have brought about more enduring, deeper changes over a long period of time. I'm talking about the brevity, the brief span within which Donald Trump has transformed the global scenario. I don't think any political leader in our living memory has managed to make himself the focal point of universal human political consciousness, as Donald Trump has done. Today, everything seems to dance on his fingertips. Well, that's a man's particular genius. I'm nobody to analyze or anatomize the ingredients of their genius. My focus here is a very limited one. Trump pricking the bubble of enmity between America and Russia. Whether that is good, bad, or indifferent is not my argument. I leave that to you to decide. I'm only an observer of events, a dispassionate observer of events. Think of the situation even on the 20th of last month. It was unthinkable that America and Russia would become partners. It was unthinkable that anyone in America would say a good word publicly about Putin, or the Americans would call him Putin. But today, Putin is America's best friend, indispensable friend. In fact, the one that Donald Trump admires most after himself is Putin, no doubt about it. The second, of course, is the Chinese Prime Minister, Xi Jinping. The third is the North Korean dictator, and so on and so forth. Now, the point I want to raise for your consideration is this. Hasn't Donald Trump challenged all of us to consider an important fact? And what is that important fact? That must be very clearly and adequately understood. That important fact is that enmity as well as friendship, cooperation as well as hostility are all engineered by human beings, and they may seem the given, the unchangeable, which it is vain for us or futile for us to try and change. They may seem imponderable, beyond our control, but not so. I think the significant intellectual, spiritual contribution that Donald Trump has done, perhaps without knowing it, therefore I should say the unwitting intellectual, spiritual contribution that Donald Trump has made to humankind till date, is this opportunity to re-examine some of our well-entrenched assumptions, particularly about enmity. Enmity is manufactured by certain centers of interest and influence, and then foisted on the rest of the people, who simply lap it up, simply because they don't have command over the facts, number one. Number two, they don't have the intellectual apparatus by which to critique these projections attempted through propaganda, propagandist projections. And third, they don't have a wide enough perspective and a historical sense from which to understand all that's happening to them, all that's being done to them. For example, if in India tomorrow Prime Minister Modi were to say that, as Gandhi said, that Muslims and Hindus are like the two eyes of India. India will not look very nice, will not look very charming and handsome without one of its eyes. If Modi were to make that statement tomorrow, I tell you, there will be a tremendous transformation in India. Till the other day, I would have thought it's impossible. But now that Donald Trump has shown the way, this looks eminently possible. Now, what's the connection of all this to Jesus Christ of Nazareth? And that's something I would like to very briefly explain. Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I remember giving a lecture to a philosophical society meeting in Delhi. They asked me to talk about philosophy and spirituality. In the course of my lecture to them, many of them in the audience were high-powered philosophers, and I was a nobody from a philosophical point of view compared to most of them. In the course of my lecture, I made a reference to this particular teaching by Jesus, that we should love our enemies. After my lecture was over, and a very senior, revered philosopher, Professor R.K. Gupta, who was presiding the meeting, he said, I can agree with everything that the speaker has shared with us today, except for one thing. Philosophically speaking, it is impossible, that's the word he used, impossible to love one's enemies. He was right. Philosophically speaking, he was right. Why did Jesus say that you can love your enemies? Because if Jesus says love your enemies, obviously he assumes that loving one's enemies is possible. Otherwise it's absurd, it's mad to say love your enemies, believing that it's impossible to love your enemies. So there must be a certain logic underlying Jesus' teaching to love one's enemies. And that logic is precisely the logic that Donald Trump has now underlined or unveiled to the global view just recently. Namely, that all this mountainous burden of enmity, all this imponderable, unmanageable force, like a volcanic eruption or like a tsunami of hatred and enmity, All this is purely man-made. You leave people to live as they are, as neighbors. There will be no enmity in the world. If it's possible for us to affirm neighborliness, the mindset of being neighbors, without the artificial lines of control, barriers and dividing walls that human beings create for their own reasons, all human beings everywhere in the world would live in mutual amity and harmony. There will be no enmity between India and Pakistan, India and China, India and Bangladesh, Pakistan and Bangladesh, between even India and Sri Lanka, of all countries. There will be no enmity between Russia and Ukraine, no enmity between Jews and Palestinians. How did this all come about? Do you think people were born with this enmity? No. They were all infected with this enmity. Just as there was a rumor that COVID-19 virus was manufactured in a lab in China. I'm totally convinced that enmity is a virus manufactured in certain labs of self-interest. They could be political, they could be religious, they could be sectarian, they could be even familial. That is, within families also there is enmity. And I have seen members of the family deliberately creating enmity, dividing the family into two, and both sides seeking to feed each other's enmity and one's own enmity by inventing lies, falsehood, by exaggerating something that has happened, something of utter insignificance. All this is purely artificial. And Donald Trump challenges us today to realize that this cobweb of enmity can be just brushed aside. And people who have deemed themselves irreconcilable enemies till the other day can become friends and brothers and sisters to each other. And that's precisely what Jesus meant. If only you would liberate yourself from all these cobwebs that have been deposited on you. And that's why Jesus said, I've come to set the captives free. Jesus says, you're all slaves. You're slaves to various assumptions, presuppositions, prejudices that have been deposited inside of you. You have not created it. You have not invented it. It has nothing to do with the truth of your life or the life of somebody else. They're absolutely arbitrary, they're irrational, they're useless. They've been deposited inside of you from the early days of your life. And then after you became an adult, all the time you've been subjected to this insane, poisonous, cancerous propaganda. And this propaganda is necessary to sustain this artificial construct of enmity. It is far easier to sweep away the cobweb of enmity and open up the avenues of friendship and cooperation, which will do the world a great deal of good. That was what Jesus meant. Now, Donald Trump, of course, does not know this. It's far too much to expect of him. He is doing so for purely commercial reasons. According to the international strategies that Trump and his team have evolved, there is a need to drive a wedge between China and Russia. Because for these two countries to come together and devise common strategies is to create unbearable headaches for the United States of America. It will seriously question or shake the very foundations of American global political hegemony, even economic hegemony. Therefore, from Trump's point of view, there is a need to drive a wedge between Putin and Xi. And the only strategy he can think of is the strategy of friendship, which therefore compels him to reject this path of enmity. It is not that Trump believes in friendship per se. More than anyone else, he believes in enmity. He is a spontaneous enemy to whoever does not agree with him or even flatter him. He will be an inveterate, sworn enemy to anyone who does not toe the line. as Americans are now slowly discovering, and various nations of the world are now discovering. He will be in a state of irreconcilable enmity to anyone who is inconvenient to him, and from his perspective, the interest of America, America first, which is the sole formula for American greatness to be globally accepted. So I have now so far covered Trump's global magic, its connection to a particular teaching of Jesus Christ. Now I'll come to the third part of my argument. How does it connect to churches in Kerala? To my great shock, my great horror, I use these words advisedly, I find certain bishops in Kerala working overtime, even to the extent of rendering themselves absolutely ridiculous in the public space and the perception of the people, to sow seeds of hatred, enmity, discord between the Christian community and the Muslim community. Kerala is very unique in this respect. It is one state where Hindus, Muslims and Christians live together in amity in sizable strength and sizable numbers. Hindus are about 54% of Kerala's population. Christians are about 18.5%. The rest are Muslims. There is no other state of this kind in India. Secondly, there is perhaps no other state in which, with this kind of demographic composition, demographic religious composition, the three communities have lived in amity, harmony, peace, mutual respect and cooperation for such a long period of time. And this unity, of course, was demonstrated to an admirable extent in 2018 when Kerala faced that huge pralaya, the great floods, devastating floods. When the real strength of Kerala was revealed, religion did not matter then. Human needs mattered. And Christians had no problem helping Muslims had no problem in accepting Hindus and Christians, so on and so forth. The true spirit of Kerala was evident at that time. But these bishops are working overtime, doing their level best, inventing lies, falsehood, to create enmity between two communities. And they are supposedly followers of Jesus Christ, the great shepherds of the flock. And they have become the foremost agents of enmity. Even though St. Paul says that Jesus' greatest achievement was that he dismantled the walls of enmity. He who embodied the light of life, he who was the bread of eternal life for all people, he who invited everyone into his heart. Come to me, all ye labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He who came to express God's love for all mankind without any religious imperialistic agenda. Therefore, Jesus never encouraged conversion. If you can show me one passage in the four Gospels where Jesus mandates conversion, I'll salute you for it. I know immediately you will cite Matthew chapter 28, verses 19-20. But please believe me, all modern scholars on biblical texts, textual criticism of the Bible, all serious scholars of the Bible are agreed that Matthew chapter 28, verses 19-20, which is called the Great Commission, was not part of the original text. It was something that was interpolated, brought arbitrarily into the text of Matthew's Gospel. You don't find this anywhere else. You find it only in Matthew's Gospel, just to create a justification, a legitimacy for a particular agenda. On the other hand, in the same Gospel, Matthew chapter 23, you find Jesus denouncing conversion. He tells the Pharisees, you move heaven and earth to gain a convert. And when a person is converted, his plight becomes 10 times worse than it was before. Now, which one are you to take seriously? You tell me. Did Jesus convert anyone? Did Jesus baptize anyone? Did Jesus insist that a person should change his religion and becomes At any rate, Jesus was not a Christian. Christians think that Jesus was a Christian. He was not a Christian at all. The word Christian came into being long after Jesus died. Its origin is traced to Antioch after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So he could not have been a Christian. So obviously he did not preach any conversion. He preached transformation. And transformation does not have to entail conversion. What's happening today is conversion without transformation. And therefore all that's happening through this religious conversion is shift in demographic patterns and balances, which obviously creates political resentment. And I'm not surprised at all that it does. So anyway, these bishops who today are working as agents for spreading enmity between communities, communal hatred, they have to ask themselves which religion they believe in, who they really follow. Therefore, 3-4 years ago, when the Bishop of Pala, Bishop Joseph Kalarangat, came out with this great discovery of his, for which he must be given some Nobel Prize for non-discovery, that Kerala's greatest problem is love jihad. And when that didn't click, he said narcotic jihad, not realizing that as far as trade in narcotics is concerned, Christians and Muslims are equally guilty. Both are equally active. And therefore, this breastbeating about narcotic jihad, which the Muslim community in a conspiratorial fashion had hatched against the Christian community, etc., that died out today. Bishop Kalarangat is mercifully very quiet. Very quiet. Good for him. Good for Kerala. Good for anyone who has common sense. Good for anyone who believes in truth and justice. And anyone who believes in people living in harmony together. So, from this Trump magic, let's learn just one thing. Only one thing. Enmity is a cobweb. It is spun by people with vested interests. It is then thrust on your face. You simply accept it and you live as though that's the ultimate thing. And I make a special request to my fellow Christians in Kerala. Would you please realize that it is shameful for you to be used as mere instruments, mindless instruments, to subserve the political communal idea, communal strategy, and the unethical goals and purposes of certain perverted people, to corrupt your conscience, your mind, your emotions with this poison of enmity, which does you no good. And see, the same poison of enmity is now also being spread within the church. The Synod of Syro-Malabar Church, in a calculated move, which was bound, they knew, every one of them knew that it was bound to have serious consequences, created this sacrament controversy. The sacrament is used to spread the poison of enmity within the Christian community, and not only within the Christian community, between the same church. And the same thing you find in the Orthodox Jacobite situation. They were part of the same church, they are now sister churches, and the bishops on both sides and the committees on both sides are busy spreading enmity. I wish they would heed Donald Trump, because it's far too much to expect of them that they would heed Jesus Christ. At least there is one Donald Trump who unwittingly has demonstrated this important fact, which can be of liberating influence on us. Enmity is an artificial thing. It doesn't even have the value of the cobweb. And it's an insult to yourself that you simply think that it's an adornment on your face when it is slapped on you. Let's reject enmity. Let's reclaim our right and freedom to love one another, as well as the right to live in peace and harmony together. Thank you. Have a great day ahead.